Hello friends, I am Abhay Kumar and at this moment I am sitting at Jawaharlal Nehru University and with me is Paresh Hate, who is doing PhD at Center for Comparative Political Theory at SIS. Paresh is doing a PhD on immigration law, but today I would be taking some questions on queer movement and how the queer collective student body are struggling to find their own identity, to get their own voices heard. Paresh, you have agreed to talk with us. I first of all express my thanks.
Thank you for interviewing as well.
So, Paresh, the first thing I would be willing to ask that you are from Bombay and you came all the way to Delhi to study politics in JNU, and you have been quite active with progressive movement, student movements in JNU. I have seen you for a couple of years, and you are associated with Hasratein group, which is a queer collective, and it says that this is an autonomous students organization. So the first question would be that what is this Hasratein group and what is its ideology, its program and its agenda?
So, Hasratein is something that some of us started in 2018 after the decriminalization of Section 377. This was when the previous queer collective in campus, Dhanak, had become inactive because a lot of students had already graduated, although some of the members from Dhanak were also part of Hasratein. And Hasratein was started as a way to think about the queer questions after the decriminalization of sodomy law. So for a very long time the queer movement was focusing only on the question of 377, right? And while there were other issues, for example Nalsa, which were particularly relevant to transgender community, we thought that it would be also good to have a student collective that pushes for, that advocates for queer rights, queer issues in the space of a university where the political discourse is much more progressive, much more sensitive, much more expansive and inclusive. So we thought it would be ideal to have a queer collective like that, and also think about what a queer movement, what a queer student body can contribute towards that. So Hasratein literally means desires, I'm sure you'd know, and we also thought it is an appropriate name because a lot of queer movement, queer politics has a very expansive, very beyond the horizon type of desires about how to organize society, how to live lives. So that's the significance of the name. But as far as what we attempted to do is we tried to create a sensitization in the campus and also around JNU, particularly in some other student bodies across South Delhi, especially because that's where JNU is, and also do an advocacy for queer students, try to participate in other movements that happen in JNU with specifically bringing up the questions of queer students which are unique but also overlap with other students. As far as the ideology of queer, our queer collective is concerned, we do have a sense of doing politics from the movements. So it is an extra constitutional, as it were, so you could call it that. It is about how to do queer liberation while thinking about all the other identities that encompass queer students as well. So the what is now called intersectionality framework in scholarship, right? So we understand all identities as interrelated, and we think that any queer liberation is not possible without the liberation of all the other identities as well, whether it's related to caste, class, gender, disability, religion, and what have you. And yeah, so some more or less that I see.
Okay, so the term queer, or for any matter Dalit, or maybe women, or maybe any other identity, secular, these are very difficult to define because people have different conception of it. But if I request you, if I ask you to define what do you mean by queer, who is a queer?
So queer was earlier used as a slur, similar to how across a lot of axes of power you have like specific terms for specific marginalized group which then gets reclaimed, right? So queer is one such term. Now you've seen that it's part of the umbrella term LGBTQIA as well. But the way I understand queer is expansive, so it includes everything related to the LGB, the T, I as well as A, right? So in that sense, in Hindi we would call it, say, Laingik Alpasankhya, because Hindi Alpasankyak. So in Hindi we know that gender and sex are not differentiated as categories which are there in English. So Laingik is a appropriate word for talking about this in Hindi, and it encompasses three things, right? The identity that is based on a deviation from how our bodily structures are, so whether it's genital, whether it's morphological, whether it's gonadal, whether it's chromosomal, and these are criteria used to distinguish between who is a man and who is a not. So a good significant population falls outside of it, which is usually called intersex, right? So any deviation from this, then any deviation from the assigned gender at birth, which is also based on आपका जेनिटल्स देख के सपोज डॉक्टर्स कह देंगे कि आप मेल है या फीमेल है, राइट? तो एनी अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ योर ओन जेंडर दैट डिविएट्स फ्रॉम दिस, which includes whether non-binary people, transgender people, and anything to do with your sexual attraction that is outside of what is understood to satisfy reproductive logic. So the heteronormative assumption is that there are only two types of people जिन्हें बचपन में मैन और वुमेन असाइन किया गया है, और जो बस एक दूसरे से ही आकर्षित हो सकते हैं, और जिनके संभोग का पर्पस है रिप्रोडक्शन. तो जो भी सारी चीज़ें इन लॉजिक के बाहर हैं, तो चाहे वो कोई भी हो जो ना कि सिर्फ एक मर्द जो एक औरत से आकर्षित है, बट दूसरे मर्द से भी और एक औरत से भी, और एक या फिर कोई औरत जो एक औरत से भी आकर्षित है, या फिर जो व्यक्ति जिनका जेंडर जो मर्द या महिला नहीं असाइन किया गया है पर उसके परे वो अपने आप को देखते हैं, तो ये सारी चीज़ें स्क्वायर के दायरे में आएंगी. So these three elements, basically the deviations based on bodily structures, the deviations from what is assigned to you at birth, the gender identity, and the type of attraction that you have which is outside of reproductive logic. So these three things are what I would call comprise queerness.
Okay, so I have also seen differences on the issues of, let's say, religious belief among different religions. But generally, their theologians and their scholars, religious scholars, would argue that sex should be done only for reproduction, okay? For giving birth, for sustaining and maintaining, let's say, humanity. It has very little to do with, let's say, seeking pleasure. And so, how do you respond to that kind of argument?
I mean, at the end of the day, people are free to follow the purposes they think.
No, as a member of Hasratein group, so how do you respond?
For example, right, the field of politics, even if is secular in a certain sense, right? So even if a person does a non-secular politics, whatever that means, and it can be a great politics or not, just like a secular politics can be good or bad. But the field of politics is structured by secularism, in that we don't have access to these ideas. So the logics from where these edicts, these principles flow, we don't have access to that. So even we ourselves have members who are religious, right? But that does not mean that it limits the purpose of sexual desire. And people anyway interpret their own religious differently, but as a queer collective we see that the field of politics cannot account for metaphysical principles, and any politics that has to be done will have to be in this field, in the secular field. So in that field, this is a political choice, this is a desire that you as an individual have, that has to be guarded because it does not lead to harm for anyone else. So yeah.
Some people also try to dismiss this queer movement by saying that it has to do with, let's say, identity and desire. It has less to do with material reality. How would you respond to it?
So
Not addressing the concrete issue like rosy roti, bread and butter issue.
So this question, right, it has been asked of most groups that have been called identity movements, right?
Yes.
So I don't think the distinction between identity politics and non-identity politics is a fruitful one.
Okay.
But there is definitely a component of queer politics, like a lot of anti-caste politics, minority politics or gender politics, that has to do with changing cultural norms. So that is definitely there. But a lot of queer politics itself, the demands they make, these demands themselves are not necessarily limited to these cultural desires, right? So a very significant part of queer politics is about how to ensure material accessibility for everyone, especially given that family as a unit is the primary site of violence for many queer persons, right? So how do we secure protection, how do we secure material affluence, how do we secure rosy roti makan basically for these queer persons who, or for any person who wants, who does not have access to the heterosexual family unit, whether it's a joint family, nuclear family, whatever, right? And this is a question of basically rosy roti makan.
Yes, sir.
And it's, I think, part of the problem is how do you translate this very issue, which obviously is of material needs, into the language that is cognizable to so-called class politics, right? Because it's like anyone can see that it is a question about these things, but it's a matter of how to translate that. So I wouldn't say this is an unimportant question. Like a lot of queer politics has already critiqued internally itself as well as externally the hyper focus on either representation as an end in itself or simply changing cultural desires, cultural principles, right? So even though these are important things and they are important struggles, there is also an element of these.
Okay. On the questions of family, I have seen some literature written by both Muslims and Hindu religious leaders. They argue that such movement, queer movements or LGBT movements, they are posing big, very serious threat to Indianness, Indian culture and family structure. And basically they would argue that these are all Western oriented, Western imported ideology and movements that must be kept away. So your view on this?
So it's not one to the...
You are not Indian.
Yeah, so the question starts from this very simple question, right? What is an Indian?
Yes.
The idea of a nation, the idea of a national identity itself is a historically contingent and recently produced identity. So for example, even when you see the debates between nationalists themselves, whether they are Hindu nationalists, Nehruvian nationalists or whatever, you see that it's a particular identity that has no material reality, but in the sense that it's not a biological fact, right? These are people are debating how to construct their idea of nationality. So that space itself is a vacuous space, right? Now a lot of queer politics tries to not be nationalist because nationalism as an ideology is exclusivist, it has proclivities for xenophobia, tries to homogenize different sets of people, right? So a lot of queer politics is cognizant of this thing, So in a sense, uh, queer politics would not only count as not being Indian, it would not even count as being American or British or Scottish or German, right? So queer politics, because of its so there are of course nationalist queer movements. So I'm not, just like how there would be any feminist politics that may align with right-wing politics, a lot of different sorts of politics can align with reactionary movements. But I would say at least our understanding is that one component of queer politics has to be to think about a political society, about an organizing principles beyond the limited frames of nationalism. And given that, the question of whether it's Indian or not is a irrelevant question, because it's not British, American, German, South African either. The question of whether queer identities come from the West has been debated, but a lot of queer scholars have already thought about how the identities, the way to think about these identities, might have emerged at a certain point in specific locations, which could be European or Euro-American. The practices themselves, what it means to do a homosexual practice, right? Or to think about yourself in a gender identity that is not your assigned. These two have existed in Indian subcontinent, South Asia for many years. So hijras, kothis, these communities who are also in some sense queer identities or queer communities, they have existed in Indian subcontinents for very many years, right? Now even the story about Kama Sutra and a lot of these other things, now these stories don't merit much because they are appropriated by the right wing to show that we have always been progressive. But if textual evidence is anything, it should also point out that these practices have been in existence for many years as well. And finally, you asked about whether it was Indian up against family, right? So that is a separate specific question, because that I would want to say, and I'm sure a lot of queer persons would disagree as well, but a queer politics is not simply about people who are queer doing politics, right? It's also like a feminist politics is not simply women doing politics. It has a particular understanding of the world and it has particular political desires. So I would say queer politics is against the family structure as it exists.
Exploitative family structure.
No, family structure.
Okay.
So the nicest family structures
will also be exploitative.
So yeah, so the way we say, right, that जैसे आप देखेंगे कि a lot of defenders of capitalism would say कि ये capitalism का दिक्कत नहीं है, ये corporate capitalism का दिक्कत है.
मतलब कि the problem is not in the capitalism, the problem is how somebody is doing it. Yeah. So if correct method is applied, then capitalism will yield.
So similarly, we would say कि of course there are rampant violences, exploitations, abuse that happens in family, which is extra above and beyond the structure of family unit, right? So those are definitely a problem. But the way in which our society thinks of family as a primary unit, that is also a problem. And that family, because it involves a lot of things, whether it's a family comes from like a patriarchal unit, right? So now there is relatively more egalitarian between the husband and the wife, but the patriarch is the part of that, is the CEO of that family unit, right? So वो जो दिक्कत है, जो हायरार्की उस फैमिली स्ट्रक्चर में है, वो तो हमेशा ही प्रॉब्लम रहेगी. जो चाइल्ड के लिए जो हायरार्की बनी है, वो तो हमेशा ही उसमें प्रॉब्लम रहेगी. द फैक्ट दैट वी हैव ऑल्सो एंथ्रोपोलॉजिकली हम देखें तो देर आर मैनी फैमिली यूनिट्स विच आर नॉट the way in which we think about joint family or nuclear family, both of which have their own perils. In Indian subcontinent, joint family particularly so, but also joint family in nuclear family in the West, which has a lot of alienating effects. So when we say we are against family, we don't mean that we are against all forms of relating to each other, but the historical versions of family that we have, they are hierarchical, दे आर वायलेंट इवन व्हेन दे डोंट डू एक्स्ट्रा वायलेंस, जो ऐसे स्पेक्टेकुलर दिखने वाला वायलेंस है उसके परे भी वो वायलेंट स्ट्रक्चर्स हैं, और वो काफ़ी हद तक किस तरह से हम लोगों से रिलेट करते हैं उसको दबाते हैं। तो इन फैमिली इंस्टीट्यूशंस के अगेंस्ट तो क्वेयर पॉलिटिक्स है। अब एक दूसरा सवाल है कि क्या हम जिस चीज़ को इमेजिन कर रहे हैं उसे हम फैमिली कहेंगे या नहीं कहेंगे, वो तो आई थिंक प्रेफरेंशियल क्वेश्चन है। मैं नहीं कहना चाहूँगा, पर मेरे कहीं कोई दोस्त कहना चाहेंगे उससे फैमिली। तो आपने देखा होगा जो कोर्ट केसेस में भी चोज़न फैमिली का ऐसे वर्ड यूज़ करते हैं, जो हम खुद चुनते हैं जिन फैमिली को। तो ये तो इंटरनल लिंग्विस्ट सिमेंटिक डिबेट है, पर जो कॉन्सिक्वेंशियल बात है कि फैमिली एज अ यूनिट दैट वी आर ऑल अवेयर ऑफ, अक्वेंटेड विद, उनके तो अगेंस्ट क्वेयर पॉलिटिक्स है या फिर होना तो ज़रूर चाहिए।
अच्छा परेश, आई वॉज राइटिंग a paper on homosexuality and Islam in 2013 and 12, and at that time I read a paper in which it was mentioned that even among the group of let's say LGBT group, people are discriminated on the basis of religion and caste.
Yeah.
So would you accept the fact that among queer activists, the identity of caste or religion may operate, and on that basis they may be discriminated?
Yeah, because of course, like as we said, right, there is the society is an intersectional system of different axes of powers. तो जिस तरह से ब्राह्मणिकल कास्ट और पेट्रियार्की ऑपरेट करते हैं, जिनको हम ब्राह्मणिकल पेट्रियार्की कहते हैं, उसी तरह हर स्ट्रक्चर एक दूसरे से मिला हुआ है. वी थिंक अबाउट देम एज डिफरेंट थिंग एनालिटिकली, but in society तो they are merging, they interrelate, they work together sometimes, right? So even amongst the progressives, even amongst people, either explicitly, implicitly, consciously, unconsciously, willingly, unwillingly, there is discrimination on the basis of caste, racialization, religion, ability, disability, लिटरेसी, उस बारे में तो वो तो क्वेयर मूवमेंट का पार्ट है. एंड काफ़ी सारे जो इंटरनल क्रिटिक्स हैं, चाहे वो आप देखेंगे दलित क्वेयर्स या फिर क्वेयर मुस्लिम प्रोजेक्ट जो एक संगठन है इंडिया में, वो इन सारी देर आर इंटरनल रिस्पॉन्सेस टू दिस दैट चैलेंज द हेजेमनी ऑफ अपर कास्ट हिंदू, which is the dominant identity in India, right? So इन सब को चैलेंज करने के लिए भी अंदर से रिस्पॉन्सेस आए हैं काफ़ी स्ट्रांगली, जो अब पिछले कुछ सालों में काफ़ी पॉपुलराइज हुए हैं फॉर्चुनेटली. तो ये मतलब आई होप कि ये कॉन्शियसनेस रहे बरकरार, पर अब तक है.
कैन इट बी द बेसिस फॉर इंटरनल डिवीजन, कंटेस्टेशन and a split among queer movement?
So I think so I come from an OBC family, okay? So I am also part of certain critiques of queer movement like this. But I think एक जो experience है हमारा, जो black feminist ने white feminist को कैसे critique किया, तो while they were very straightforward, while they were very challenging, उन्होंने काफ़ी strongly ये lines draw किए, but वो फिर भी उन्हें एक तरह से अपना political comrades मानते थे.
But you mean to say that even if somebody is, let's say, upper caste queer, okay, and you may have some disagreement with his politics or his life, the way he is doing they are doing politics, so that differentiate should not dilute the fact that he is part of your movement.
No.
And there can be some solidarity with him.
So not really. Then उनका एक तो है कि वो इस आइडेंटिटी का पार्ट है, जिसके बेसिस पे उनके साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होता है. तो उसके लिए काम करना इज वन थिंग, बट से इफ देयर आइडियोलॉजी, देयर लाइक, सो द डिफरेंस बिटवीन देयर आइडेंटिटी एंड आइडियोलॉजी, राइट? सो to give extend solidarity to a right wing upper caste queer is not is counterproductive and it's useless as well. So to recognize, but this fact can be simultaneously held with recognizing that उनको queerness के basis पे discrimination होता है, but इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि वो जो politics करते हैं उसे हमें support करना चाहिए.
तो आप ये कह रहे हैं कि queer identity की वजह से you will be able to recognize the amount of discrimination that person is facing, but at the same time you will also remain a critic of that person because of the ideology.
Yeah, and so ये तो depend करता है कि काफ़ी सारे upper caste queers themselves could be allies of a politics that is critical of these internal hegemonies, right? So that's why I'm saying कि there's a difference between their identity and their ideology. तो जैसे we think about allies, right, or like accomplices जो भी हों, तो ये तो सारे चाहे वो मर्द जो फेमिनिस्ट के allies हों या अपर कास्ट जो एंटी कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स के allies हों या फिर इंटरनली ऑल्सो जो अपर कास्ट क्वेयर्स हैं जो पर्टिकुलर इंटरसेक्शनल क्वेयरनेस के allies हों या फिर उसका हिस्सा हों. allies थोड़ा सा लिमिटेड शब्द है क्योंकि मतलब फिर उनकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी को हम साइडलाइन करते हैं, बट एज accomplices in that movement they can always be part of, right? So that's why I'm saying this division is important to keep in mind, to not diminish the violence they face but also recognize that certain fights are not about their identity as much as their political participation in certain structures of power.
Okay, let's take the example of JNU.
जी.
There are multiple left students organization. Similarly, there are several students bodies who claim to represent Dalit and Bahujan students. So similarly, do you have just one queer organization on this campus, or on the basis of other identities there are multiple queer organizations operating in JNU?
So right now, no. JNU has had 3 queer organizations.
Okay.
The first one was Anjuman, which started in 2006 or 7-8, which stopped functioning I think around 2014. उसके बाद धनक आया और उसके बाद हसरते आया, एंड काफ़ी सारे जो एक दो तो जो अंजुमन के मेंबर थे वो भी हसरते में थे, जो कुछ धनक के मेंबर्स थे वो भी हसरते में थे. राइट नाउ देयर इज़ नो अदर क्वियर कलेक्टिव, but I would say we don't want to claim that we represent queer students, because we also think of ourselves as a political organization. We have specific understanding of politics, which is informed by queer politics as it is done globally in India, across the world, which may not be nationalist, which may be extra constitutionalist, which may be intersectional, which may think about not simply in terms of representation, right? So there are quite a lot of queer students who, if they convey to us something and when we ask them to convey something, what their demands are, there is that type of translation happening. जैसे agenda में भी हम हमारे ही मेंबर जो क्वेयर हैं उनसे भी बात किए हैं, कुछ और क्वेयर स्टूडेंट से भी बात किए हैं, बट I don't think we would say that we represent them, precisely because we have a specific ideology that other queer students may not believe in, may not endorse.
New left organizations are floated in JNU, and one argument that is very common, which is often given, is that the previous organization was not receptive of internal critique. So will you say that your organization is really listening to those who have a very different opinion?
So it depends. So fortunately we have
your
had
experience.
We have had some internal arguments about certain things, but I think most of them we have been able to respond to everyone collectively. तो ऐसा मतलब even when someone disagreed and left the organization, that has also happened, and of course it could always be both parties have their own problems in that situation, but as far as I can say उतना तो मतलब in most cases we have managed to respond to the questions raised, whether from ourselves, whether from other members. And but when it comes to other students, right, then it depends. So because they are not part of the collective, what, like if they are asking for a certain thing, of course we are helping them out, but one also has to figure out what is that beyond a simple demand, what is that demand's role in a larger political context as well.
About secular and religious debate, do you think that a person can be member of your Hasratein group and at the same time he would be a staunch believer?
Yeah, we already have such members.
Then how to reconcile that faith and...
But that is not a problem for the queer collective. That is the person's question, right?
Okay.
So the person who is... So I am not religious.
Okay, suppose if I become the member
Yeah.
in your group and I am deeply religious, then will you accept me as a religious, as a believer, being member, or I will be asked to become secular?
No, so the politics we are doing is secular that's why I said secular, not in the sense that
Secular is this worldly.
yeah, so not secular as an opposite of communal,
Okay,
which is
yeah,
a very
yeah.
bad distinction,
Yes.
but secular in the sense it's concerned with these facts. So whoever cares about these particular demands in this setup, they can of course be a member, and we to always have been open to non-queer people also.
No. We have heard such stories that in left parties, if somebody is, let's say, praying, okay, so then the comment would be made, I don't know, but people generally say it, that comrade, let's get out from this false consciousness, okay.
Because some of our earliest members, and even now the few members that we have,
Yes.
some of them are religious,
Okay.
and the question of how to reconcile, that is an individual question. So the queer collective is also not trying to be like an overall program of politics, right? It has specific agendas, specific aims, and if it stops serving those aims, we'll probably stop functioning. So इन इस दायरे के अंदर जो काम है वो आपको कमिटेड, उस काम से आप कमिटेड हो, उसके अलावा वो आपकी निजी जिंदगी का सवाल है, जो आपका जो पॉलिटिकल भी हो सकता है, ऐसा नहीं कि वो प्राइवेट क्वेश्चन है, बट वो पॉलिटिकल सवाल आपके लिए है.
Okay. Some people argue that this queer movement is only seen at elite places. Do you think that it has become strong, or is it only limited to very a small section of the students?
In JNU?
In JNU and outside also?
I mean, outside, so this used to be this used to be a critique, and this is true also to a large degree. But I think in the last few years, a lot of other movements have started. So in Tamil Nadu has one of the very strong queer movement, trans movement, run by Grace Banu, who's a Dalit trans person.
Okay.
In Hyderabad, there is a very strong conversation between anti-caste politics and queer movements who try to challenge the way in which previously queer movements have existed. So that has always been the case, that there were these elite spaces where queer people would be most found, but that is also because a lot of people who came from elite backgrounds generally had the capacity to be able to be out and visible, right? Whereas a lot of others had different questions, material questions that were not resolved for them to be part of these things. Whereas now I think that this trend is changing, but this trend is also not true across the world. For example, a lot of early trans and queer politics in USA itself was started by sex workers, black trans people who were very much part of working class backgrounds, right? So it depends. So there is no way to say इस जगह पे ऐसा है, क्योंकि कुछ जगहों पे वैसा नहीं भी है. In JNU, तो I don't think that is true, because JNU, at least one good thing about JNU would be that थोड़ा सा वो heterogeneous population है. So even the members that we have had, the queer people we have met in campus, they themselves come from very diverse background, which also means that they challenge if conscious or unconscious eliteness that can be demonstrated in politics. So I don't think JNU का ऐसा experience रहा है, at least मेरा. So yeah.
And friends, when you start learning grammar at, let's say, class 2 or class 3 or first class, the teacher would tell you that use he with men and she with women, and then him with for man and her for women, something like that. But Paresh is saying, and the Hasratein group is saying, that just discard he, she.
No, we are not saying discard.
Then give up.
No, so
Prefer they.
so there are people, so non-binary persons or whoever thinks.
So Paresh is saying that instead of using he
Or she as a default, you ask the person what they prefer.
Okay. So and in case if you are not aware of the fact, then use they. Am
Yeah,
I right?
that's a good strategy.
Okay. So Paresh, why don't you clarify some of the doubts around this topic?
So a lot of people identify with the gender assigned at birth, right?
Okay. Okay.
So आपको शायद आपको ठीक लगता है कि आपका categorization as a man है, तो आप he which is the masculine pronoun आपको ठीक लगता है,
Okay.
तो जो default है वो आपको ठीक लग गया. अब जो समझो एक ट्रांस पर्सन है जिनकी ज़िंदगी, जिनका खुद का सेल्फ अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ अ जेंडर इज़ दैट ऑफ अ वुमन, सो दे वुड प्रोबेबली प्रेफर शी, राइट. सिमिलरली अ ट्रांस मैन जिनको से बचपन में ही असाइन किया गया, उनको शी असाइन किया गया, उन्हें एज अ मैन उनकी आइडेंटिटी अंडरस्टैंड होती है, तो दे वुड प्रोबेबली यूज़ ही. एंड देन देर आर नॉन बाइनरी जिनको अब जो भी वेदर मैन और वुमेन ऐसे असाइन किया गया उसके परे अपने जेंडर आइडेंटिटी के बारे में वो सोचते हैं. जैसे कि मैं तो आई वुड प्रेफर दे, एंड दे विच इज़ बोथ अ सिंगुलर एंड अ प्लूरल इन इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज इज़ ऑल्सो यूज, लाइक जब हम कहते हैं कि आर दे कमिंग टू आर I don't know something. So
are they coming to my house, something like
yeah, so you don't know, someone says a doctor is coming, now you don't know the gender of the doctor, so you say are they coming.
Okay.
So they का singular उपयोग तो काफ़ी सालों से होता ही आया है, पर इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि नहीं होता होगा तो उसमें कुछ दिक्कत होती है.
Okay, so आप ये कह रहे हैं, your argument is that if somebody is comfortable with he and she, then it is okay.
Yeah.
But there may be people who would not be happy with this neat categorization of male and female. For them, they should be preferable, and for a person like you would be more happy if somebody uses they instead of she or he. And in your view, they are much more gender neutral, and it can also solve many binary issues as well. Am I right?
Solve तो नहीं,
Address
or
dilute.
I think the primary purpose is here dignity का सवाल है ना. इसमें so the question about how to address someone, this is primarily a question about how to afford dignity to a person. इससे काफ़ी सारे queer demands solve तो नहीं होंगे, which is fine, but certain things we do for the limited political aims that they have. So this is like जैसे anti caste movement में भी एक element dignity का.
For example, Dalits were called Harijan because of this Gandhian movement. But later when Dalit activists started raising objection to that, then in popular language, in academic writing or sensitive people, they stopped calling them Harijan, and they prefer calling them Dalits. Now, related to this he, she, they debate is the debate around gender neutral bathroom or washroom in JNU. Hasratein has recently brought out 2 pages parcha pamphlet in JNU at the time of JNU elections 2024, which was just held a few days back, in which there were several demands. One of them was that let's transform bathroom into or washroom into gender neutral washroom. So what is this concept?
So gender neutral washrooms will be washrooms that anyone can use,
Okay.
regardless of their gender. So
Okay.
the need for this is for many reasons.
Okay.
One, because a lot of trans persons they face violence in the washroom they want to use,
Okay.
right? A lot of non-binary people like myself would not necessarily identify with, say, a men's washroom. The third thing is that gendered washrooms का कोई नीड ही नहीं है. जब आप वॉशरूम जाते हैं तो आपका जो भी बिजनेस है वो तो एक स्टॉल के अंदर का काम है ना, या फिर अगर आपका कोई अटेंडेंट हो, अगर आप नाबालिग हो या फिर आप डिसेबल्ड स्टूडेंट हो, आपके साथ कोई पर्सन हो साथ में, तो उनके लिए और आपके लिए बस उस स्टॉल की ज़रूरत है. जो बाकी का जो उसका कलेक्शन है कि यहाँ पे सिर्फ मर्द जाएंगे, यहाँ पे सिर्फ औरत, वो तो एक्स्ट्रा स्पेस है ना बेसिकली. और उसका एग्जिस्टेंस तो द वे सोसाइटी स्ट्रक्चर्ड उसके वजह से है, उसका एक्चुअल वॉशरूम रिलेटेड कोई यूज़ नहीं है. सो जेंडर न्यूट्रल वॉशरूम होने से एक तो ये ट्रांसजेंडर स्टूडेंट्स, नॉन बाइनरी स्टूडेंट्स, इवन समटाइम्स डिसेबल्ड स्टूडेंट्स को हेल्प मिलेगी. वो तो एक उसका पार्ट हुआ. दूसरा है कि वो जो एग्जिस्टिंग जेंडर नॉर्म्स है जिसके बेसिस पे ना कि सिर्फ समाज और आइडेंटिटीज़ बट ऑल्सो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इज़ डिज़ाइन. जैसे हम देखते हैं कि कोई कोई इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इज़ नॉट डिसेबल फ्रेंडली बिकॉज जो सोच उसके पीछे गई है वो एक एबलिस्ट सोच है, राइट? तो उसको बदलने से काफ़ी, मतलब सिर्फ डिसेबल्ड स्टूडेंट्स को ही फ़ायदा नहीं होगा, काफ़ी सारे लोगों को ही फ़ायदा हो सकता है. उसी तरह जो जेंडर न्यूट्रल वॉशरूम्स है, जो एक तरह का क्वेयर अफर्मेटिव इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल डिमांड है, उससे ऑफ कोर्स क्वेयर स्टूडेंट्स को तो फ़ायदा होगा ही, बट उससे हर किसी को ही फ़ायदा होगा. और उससे एक जो एडिशनल चीज़ है कि जो अनजस्टिफाइड जेंडर नॉर्म्स है जो हमारे समाज में काफ़ी तरीके से सैचुरेटेड हैं, उनको भी चैलेंज होता है.
Paresh, in JNU there are several left organizations, and in 2024 general elections 3 seats in central parliament were won by left organization, one by BAPSA, which is Ambedkarite organization. So we have on this campus, JNU campus, Ambedkarite organization, left organization, and they all represent progressive politics. So what is the need to have Hasratein as a separate group? Do you think that your demands, your aspirations were not incorporated by them?
Yes, but so one to yes, of course. The other is we don't want to be an electoral organization, right? We want to do advocacy, sensitization. We want to be able to communicate the demands of queer students to a union as well and the administration whenever that's possible. But ये आप देखेंगे कि JNU के भी हिस्ट्री में जब से बापसा आया तो बाकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस भी एंटी कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स लेके अकाउंटेबल बनी. फ्रेटर्निटी या MSF या कोई और माइनॉरिटी स्टूडेंट्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से भी बाकी जो संगठन है वो अकाउंटेबल बने टू रिस्पॉन्ड ऑन दिस. तो उसी तरह से हसरतैन, दिस हैज़ हैपेंड विद धनक एंड अंजुमन ऑल्सो, नॉट सो मच अंजुमन बट धनक, क्योंकि तब थोड़ा क्वेयर मूवमेंट का डिस्कोर्स थोड़ा पब्लिसाइज हुआ था. तो एक क्वेयर संगठन होने से जो इश्यूज़ हैं उनके लिए बाकी लोग भी अकाउंटेबल होते हैं और उनके इंटरनल मेंबर्स माइट बी प्रोग्रेसिव देमसेल्व्स, दे माइट सपोर्ट क्वेयर मूवमेंट, दे माइट बी क्वेयर देमसेल्व्स, बट एज एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन to have like an external group like this helps in holding them accountable as well. So आप देखेंगे कि पिछले 5, 6, 10 सालों में काफ़ी सारे संगठन इस बात को दोहराते हैं इलेक्शन के वक्त, बाकी समय में भी, उनके काफ़ी सारे मेंबर्स बढ़ गए हैं जो क्वेयर आइडेंटिटी से हैं. तो इन अ वे it does not solve everything, of course, but as a student body in student politics it does have benefits, which, so yeah.
As I have mentioned that Hasratein's pamphlet during 2024 general election, which were just held, brought several issues to the forefront. One of them was that sexually transmitted disease and infections should be tested and health facilities should be provided at a JNU center. And another was that sensitization drives should be held for those who are in power and those who are in authority, because they most of the time they turn insensitive towards the students. But the most important demand is that inclusion of gender and sexuality within equal opportunity office. For example, if there is any discrimination done to SC or ST candidates, they can go to equal opportunity office and they can get their demand addressed. Whether they are addressed or not, that is another thing. But now Paresh is saying that apart from ST and SC and other marginalized community, queer people with a queer identity, their grievances should also be addressed at equal opportunity cell office so that they could get justice. So Paresh, if you say that queer members should also be given access to equal opportunity cell, some people might think that by underscoring the identity of queer or by advocating that they should be given access to equal opportunity cell, somehow you are diluting the identity of SC and ST. So how do you respond to such apprehension?
This is so not true. We are not saying everything else should be removed, right? All of these are important things, and many students will probably face not just one but multiple types of discrimination, right? A Dalit queer student, a Bahujan queer student will probably be more likely to face both queer phobia and casteism. तो ये भी उनकी ज़िंदगी के इम्पॉर्टेंट घटक हैं जो एक इक्वल अपॉर्चुनिटी सेल एड्रेस करना चाहिए. एंड as far as diluting specifically caste related offences is concerned, I don't think that is true, because even you would know that Ambedkar himself fought for the rights of sexual minority in a landmark case, right? And this recently a lot of queer and anti-caste solidarity is drawing upon this shared legacy. तो ये सारी चीज़ें I think थोड़ा unfounded fears हैं, which sometimes are justified, sometimes are misinformation, but yeah.
So final question, the last question. In coming days, in coming weeks, in coming months, what would be the activities of Hasratein on this campus? ABVP has been voted out of the power. So do you think that your demands are going to be paid serious attention by the left and BAPSA organization? And what are your activities in coming days?
So hopefully they will be addressed by the union, but also we want to pick up at least some of these demands that are within our capacity. So for example, one demand is to include queer scholarship in board of studies, right? Yes. So for that we'll have to say constantly ask certain union members, whereas certain other things we can initiate on our own. So we are planning to present a dossier of information about why gender neutral washroom is important to the admin, to dean of students, rector. So that is one agenda for us. As far as how much successful that will be, is वो तो हर issue के लिए कि अब admin ही सबसे determined है ना कि क्या होगा क्या नहीं होगा. तो वो तो हम try करेंगे, अब हो ना हो वो admin पे है.
Paresh has definitely removed many doubts. He has removed many misconceptions, unfounded belief, and I hope that if you listen to this conversation, some of apprehensions that you have in your mind might be removed. And the politics of Hasratein is a pointer to the fact that the fight for dignity, human equality is a long way to go, and we must keep fighting. And there are multiple axis of discrimination. Paresh, thank you very much for talking
Thank
to me.
you. Thank you so much.